Katerina Jakob watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Jakob saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review with Chris Driscoll and Rainer Shea. This is the episode for July 9th, 2021, although we are sitting here over Zoom, of course, recording this on the night prior on July 8th at a little bit past 9 p.m. Pacific time, also Mountain Time or Arizona time. Arizonans have things all screwed up because they don't have daylight savings time, so they're not really with Mountain Time, and they're with Pacific Time during the summer, and then during the winter they're with Mountain Time. So it's kind of makes things confusing. Anyway, my little editorial comment on Arizona. I don't know if you guys can tell, I don't like it much, even though I've been stuck here for the last 7 or 8 years and was stuck here for 15 years during the 90s and early 2000s. Anyway, let's see, where are we? Rainer. Tonight, we've got 5 different articles from you up here on the agenda, on the list of topics for the night, and we're starting off with you with what looks like, although I didn't get a chance to read it, so this will be the first for me hearing about it, but the U.S. empire's decline and America's looming domestic revolt. Rainer Shea.
Right. See, in these last 20 years, I think that the wars that Washington and its imperial proxies have been carrying out have foreshadowed the events that are going to befall the zones within U.S. borders, because the imperial boomerang effect says that an empire's violences abroad get imported to the borders of the empire, especially during that empire's decline. So as the U.S. empire declines, the events that it creates abroad, like in Afghanistan, are, I think, inevitably going to be brought home. And what's happening in Afghanistan? Anti-imperialist resistance force has been successfully beating back the Americans for these last 2 decades by taking advantage of the fact that U.S. imperialism, the U.S. occupation in Afghanistan has brought massive corruption to there, whether it's rigged elections or the drug trade, all that opium industry, or bribery for the CIA cash. These realities have been exploited by the Taliban to persuade the locals to support the Taliban in its resistance efforts. And I expect that something parallel is going to happen within US borders within our generation. Because, as I've discussed previously, a sociologist named Temitope Oriola, sociology professor, predicted this year that at some point fairly soon, the most disenfranchised and impoverished people within the US are going to start rising up in an armed sense against the government, specifically law enforcement, because of the increasingly brutal nature of the police state that Americans, particularly the colonized people assimilated into America, are forced to live under. There is going to be an uprising that, as the sociologist says, could potentially morph into a parallel movement to the Zapatista rebellion in southern Mexico, or to any other given guerrilla rebellion against an occupier. And I see Afghanistan as a prelude to the obstacles that the US military is internally going to encounter when it tries to crush this rebellion. Because the US imperialism, both externally and internally, creates its own problems by hurting the interests of the masses. And when you're hurting the interests of the masses, it's very easy for rebels to exploit that and turn the masses against you.
Yes, I would say so. I'm not sure if that is the way things will shake out the way you're describing. However, it is interesting, and it does seem to be a principle, a law of empires, crumbling empires, that they revisit all of the imperialist, fascistic kinds of police state activities on their own people, as their own people react and rebel to or against, I should say, what they are doing to hold on to power in their death agony, in their crumbling days, in their decline. And I think there can be no doubt now that the US empire is in its decline. It's in its decline first and foremost in its status around the world. The hegemony of culture that the US has been able to maintain over much of the world, especially since World War II, but prior to that even, is not having the same sway on world opinion anymore, and more people around the world just do not believe, and especially people in the United States, especially the working class in the United States, do not believe what the U.S. Empire tells them. The American Empire seems more and more brutal to people as more and more of what they do becomes exposed. And as people relate what they say to what they experience in life. And that's despite the almost total blackout. We'll be talking about that, a really interesting article from the Greenville Post by Caitlin Johnstone, I guess her name is, that I'll be talking about a bit later in relation to that as well. But even despite that huge, almost total blackout of real news of what's really going on in the world and what the American Empire really does in its criminal rogue nation marauding and raping and pillaging around the world, even despite that blackout, people are figuring it out. People are anti-war more and more. People are anti-police state. That's obvious. It's been obvious for the last year, as more than 36 million people hit the streets about this time last year to protest the American police state and American police murders of Black and brown people in the ghettos of the United States. Yeah, so how this will shake out, I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure that we'll see a Zapatista kind of thing, but I am pretty sure that this sociologist that you referred to, he was talking about inner city rebellions. And I am pretty sure we will see inner city rebellions erupting in the Black and brown neighborhoods coming out of this. Of that, I am almost completely sure. Where that will go, I hope that it goes in the direction of Marxism-Leninism, that some Marxist-Leninist current will grab the attention of and the hearts and minds of those erupting people, of those protesting, rebelling people, and lead them in the direction of mass action, of a general strike that can bring down the capitalist ruling class in this country and around the world for that matter. That's my hope, but we'll see what direction it has to go in. I mean, that was also the hope of the Salvadoran youth, communist youth in 1980, that they could move towards that kind of effort. But what they faced instead were fascist gun squads that gunned them down in the streets. There was a famous massacre, I think it was on the steps of a church, if I'm not mistaken, or something having to do with university. My memory is a little bit hazy, but that pushed them in the direction of guerrilla warfare. That was their only out at that point. So we'll see. We can definitely expect fascist violence from the American state and from the right wing dimwits that the capitalist ruling class controls, the fascistic dimwits, fascistic Keystone cops, if we judge by January 6th, 2021 in Washington, D.C. Anyway, yeah, interesting take on that, Rainer. Anything else on that?
No, I'm sure we'll flesh it out more.
Okay, good. Next on the list, the assassination of Haiti's president and the ongoing rebellion against Haiti's US-backed bourgeois dictatorship. This is something that happened yesterday. Well, yesterday as we speak, it happened on the 7th of July, and it was the president, Juvenal Moise, was assassinated, the Haitian president in Haiti. And he was, well, why don't I'm going to just read you a clip from the article that Liberation News, the newspaper of the Party of Socialism and Liberation, published about this yesterday, or 2 days ago, as most of our viewers will see it, since we probably won't even be done taping this until pretty close to the end of July 8th. Anyway, this happened on July 7th. In the early hours of July 7th, Haitian president turned dictator Jovenel Moise was assassinated at his home in Port-au-Prince. While many details of the assassination remain unclear, the political vacuum in Haiti will likely result in a fierce struggle over the direction of the nation in the coming weeks. The Biden administration's initial reactions to the assassination disturbingly indicate that the US government is considering deepening their intervention in Haiti, which could possibly involve a military intervention. Biden's official statement pledges that the United States stands ready to assist. The spokesman for the State Department ominously said that the United States is prepared to receive additional requests from Haitian authorities. A new U.S. occupation of Haiti, or any type of meddling in the country's sovereign affairs, would be a disaster. For over a century, the U.S. military has helped corporations plunder Haiti, carrying out invasions, supporting coups, menacing anyone who fights for freedom and independence of the country. Even if they use humanitarian language, the goal of any U.S. intervention remains the same. The assassination comes at a time of incredible political, social, and economic turmoil within Haiti, increasingly poor living conditions, and a grossly inadequate government response to COVID-19 have left the masses of Haitians completely devoid of economic and social support. Already nearly 60% of the nation lives in extreme poverty, and the failure of the Moise administration to rectify the root causes of such poverty has exacerbated kidnappings for ransom by people struggling to survive. The repression from the Haitian National Police has only served to make the situation increasingly unsafe and unstable for Haitians. Now, I picked out, I don't know, 4 or 5 other articles from various, mostly left sources, and their reactions from this. For instance, Black Voices for Peace had, I think, a really interesting statement on this, on the assassination and on the entire situation in Haiti. People are obviously ready to erupt there. Their situation vis-a-vis leadership is somewhat tenuous because a lot of the intellectual left of Haiti has been driven out of Haiti by the fascist government, by successive fascist governments, all supported by the American empire. In fact, Haiti is a neo-colony of the United States and has been for a long time. And it seems as though they see it as an important one. It's strategically important, placed as where it is in the Caribbean. It's placed right next to Cuba. And the Americans love to have a platform close by to harass Cuba. And their platform in Haiti allows them that. And they have often used Haiti as a platform for attacking and trying to undermine Cuba. But American presence on Haiti gives the American empire a commanding platform from which to project power into the entire Caribbean and into large parts of the Americas, North, South, and Central. So they seem as though they want to keep it. And no matter what happens, I mean, when Aristide, a left-leaning populist person, was elected in the mid-90s, the Clinton regime immediately engineered a coup d'etat against him, an overthrow, and Aristide had to flee Haiti. And then the Americans invaded Haiti. Americans invaded Haiti again in 2013, when the big earthquake happened. There have been floods more recently that the Americans have used their humanitarian aid, as they call it, which is really just a cover for CIA and State Department and U.S. military activities against the Haitian people. Things have really been heating up in Haiti over the last couple of months. There were big demonstrations demanding that President Moise resign and leave the country. So the assassination, there's not a lot of information about this assassination out there. A couple of people have been arrested. They seem to be mercenaries, and that's not surprising. Whoever ordered this hit, and I'll put it this way, I don't know, but I will not be surprised to find out that it was actually the CIA, the American government, that ordered this hit, because they are starting to see Moise as inconvenient. They wanted to get rid of him. And this would give them an excuse to invade again, just as Biden and the State Department were saying in the first quotes in that article from Liberation News. So, Rainer, what are your thoughts?
This last year, we've seen the fall of a U.S. installed neocolonial regime in Colombia, with the forcing through of sorry, I misspoke. We've seen the fall of neocolonial U.S. installed in Bolivia, with the forcing through by the social movements there of new elections that
Could
have
you
allowed
repeat?
for
I'm
the socialists
sorry.
to come back
I'm
into
sorry.
power.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat where that was? You got
Bolivia.
Libya.
I,
Okay,
I
thank you.
keep mixing up Colombia and Bolivia because they sound almost the same.
Yeah, Bolivia. Right. Okay, I'm sorry.
We've
Go ahead.
seen the fall of neocolonialism there, and now we're seeing great opposition to neocolonialism in Colombia and Brazil, as well as Peru, Chile. In Chile, a socialist candidate has apparently come to lead the presidential polls, and the imperialists may have succeeded at sabotaging the presidential campaign of an anti-IMF candidate in Ecuador. But it's clear that Ecuador is consequentially going to become just as unstable as somewhere like Haiti or Colombia, because the logical conclusion of this free market fanaticism that Washington has imposed across most of Latin America is for a situation like Haiti's, where there's been this reaction from the neo-colonial government to the growing class tensions, where the government has decided to become an outright open dictatorship. This Moise president guy has insisted on extending his term illegally, and this has heightened the contradictions. It's laid those contradictions bare, and has, as you said, made him actually inconvenient for the continuation of neocolonialism, because the consequence of him getting assassinated, even though he definitely deserved to get assassinated, now this has allowed for the government to transition to something that appears more normal. It's totally an optical thing, and now Biden is able to as you're saying, it seems like Biden is going to invade Haiti or occupy it in a similar way to how it was occupied I think it was from the 2000s to somewhere in the 2000s to 2015, where Washington got its proxy government in Brazil to carry out an occupation of Haiti. So that's actually something to note in the coming few years as Brazilian politics continues to evolve, because Lula may be able to become president now, but we shouldn't forget that he was the one who carried out an occupation of Haiti on behalf of the United States. We'll see how he behaves in that regard if he becomes president.
Yeah. Good points. Okay, next up on the list, the U.S. settler-colonial state is doomed along with Israel.
The difference between settler colonialism in the United States and Israel is that the United States and its twin imperialist settler colonial state, Canada, have already managed to grab up the land of basically an entire continent, whereas Israel has only been able to grab up a little narrow strip of land that could easily fit into the state of New York. And this has made it so that the United States has a relative buffer when it comes to preserving its power, because it has all of this land, all of this access to resources, all of this this territorial reach. It can both exploit more resources and fortify its capital in that way, and it can create an illusion of legitimacy by making people not see the indigenous nations whose land they're living on. There's been such a successful erasure and segregation of indigenous peoples on this continent that the settler majority in this country seemingly doesn't even think about the First Nations in their daily lives. That's not something that's relevant to them, and that's by this diabolical plot that's been carried out over these last several centuries to kill off 90% of the indigenous peoples here and to exploit African and Chinese labor in order to build up the largest empire in the history of humanity. And this is the consequence of the success of this genocide in the Americas. This is what's resulted from the depopulation of the Americas when it comes to the indigenous peoples here. Whereas in Palestine, the Israeli occupiers are very much, it's very much in question whether or not they'll be able to survive in the short term. It's very much in question whether or not Israel will survive to 100, because the Palestinian movement is still so strong there, and it's engaged in this actual war against the occupier state, which is that's not exactly the case. That's far from the case when it comes to the indigenous First Nations here, or when it comes to the colonized African nation here, because of how successful the genocide has been here. But the Israelis, it seems, are fighting an uphill battle where they wish that they could replicate the genocide that happened in the Americas and successfully erase Palestine in the equivalent way to how the First Nations were erased here. But Palestine refuses to be pacified, and Palestine continues to fire rockets in response to Israel's provocations, in response to Israel's abuses against the Palestinians within its borders. And as a result, Israel is confronted with colonial contradictions that, at least on the surface, are more significant than the case within the United States and Canada. So it seems like Israel is going to be the first settler state to fall to the forces of national liberation before the U.S. and Canada, simply because the U.S. and Canada have gotten so big and because they're at the center of global imperialism, whereas Israel, it isn't big enough to be a global imperialist power. It seems like Israel, aside from its little land grabs, it siphons wealth from the imperialist powers. That's actually how Israel survives militarily. Israel wouldn't really be able to survive against the Palestinian liberation movement without U.S. aid. And so the colonial contradictions that Israel is facing, they are ultimately going to be faced by the U.S. and Canada, because the colonial contradictions everywhere are perpetually intensifying in this era of imperial decline, in this era of weakening capital, in this era of environmental degradation and climatic catastrophe.
That's a lot to digest. Yeah, it seems to me that as long as the American empire is supporting the Zionist occupiers of Palestine, the Zionist state, with massive amounts of armaments, massive funding that they do get, billions and billions of dollars each year, that the Zionists can hold out. The Palestinian movement, yes, it is strong in character. It's strong in its unity. It's strong in its support by the people. The people of Palestine really want to eliminate the Zionist fascist state, as any rational people would want. Any rational people under the jackboot of a fascist dictatorship, a fascist police state, which is what the Zionist occupiers of Palestine really are. Anyone would want to get rid of that. So I think it's kind of the other way around. Well, I'm not even kind of, I shouldn't use that qualifier. I think it's the other way around. I think that Israel as a state will not collapse until the American Empire collapses. And the American Empire will not collapse. I mean, it is in the process of decline, but it will not collapse until a strong class-based movement erupts and is able to bring them down. When will that all of that take place? I have no clue, because I don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately. Sometimes I wish I did. So I kind of like to steer clear of predictions about, you know, when these things are going to happen, although I do feel in my gut and in all of my analysis and all of my observation that the US empire, the American empire, is in big trouble right now. And that this is the time for the working class to strike. I do feel that the spearhead, the vanguard of our class, which is the Black communities and brown communities in this country, are very close to boiling over, just as this sociologist that you have mentioned several times in the last several weeks points out. I really think that's true. I think that the American empire is scrambling. I had a discussion with a friend of mine, a Black guy, who is from Alaska, lives in Alaska in Fairbanks, and he was talking about what's going on there with the U.S. base that's very near there, the U.S. Army base, and he says he's never ever seen the scramble, the kind of frantic scramble and the activity going on, and it's affecting the whole city. And that the the ghettos of that city, the Black and brown communities and the Native American communities and those in that city are ready to erupt. I think that he's right. It's a guy that I've never met him, but I've been friends with him on the Facebook kind of friend, you know, and he's a smart guy, a Marxist-Leninist who I really trust, and that's what he says. I know over the skies here right above me that it really seems as though the military jets that are flying over from Luke Air Force Base, which is about 4 miles to the south of here, have really picked up their activity. They're doing a lot of low flying to where it really shakes the walls. You can hear it inside. And it really seems like they're preparing for something. Who knows what, but they're scrambling. The U.S. military is in a frantic scramble. So anyway, we'll see how it goes, Rainer. As I always say, these things could just as easily shake out the way you envision them shaking out as the way I do. I'm not like I said, I don't have a crystal ball about this, but that's just the way it seems to me. As long as the U.S. empire is there to support its land-based aircraft carrier in Western Asia, which is what the Zionist occupiers of Palestine really are. They're just an extension of U.S. Military might, using some proxy forces. So the Americans use whatever proxy forces they can. As long as the Americans have the money and the the massive military weaponry to supply the Zionists, the Zionist state, I think the Zionist state will hold on. Palestinians, they have the numbers, they have the support of the streets in all Arab nations and in all Muslim nations, if not all of the governments, because a lot of those governments are puppets of the American empire. But yeah, I mean, in the long run, the Palestinians just need to hold on, hold out. They will continue to be bombed and strafed by the Zionist fascists, and we've got to extend them every solidarity we are able to extend them. Okay. Anything more on that? Good.
Oh, well, the reason why I think it's possible that Israel will fall first is because in this last year, the colonial government in Bolivia that the U.S. installed fell to the forces of popular revolt, and obviously Washington was still there to back it. But it sounds like Israel's state is a lot stronger than Bolivia's dictatorship was a year ago. It was kind of a haphazard arrangement that they constructed there, compared to the decades of fortification and colonization that the Israelis have been carrying out.
Yeah, the Americans over the last couple of decades have attempted to build up their fascist regime in Colombia in the same fashion as they have done with the Zionist state. However, they're nowhere near as far along the road. On the other hand, the working class movement in Colombia and the communist leadership in Colombia, I think, is far, far stronger, and it's far, far stronger situation. They have not been, ethnically cleansed and genocided out of much of Colombia as the Palestinian people have literally been ethnically cleansed and driven out or genocided in much of the center of Palestine. They're still holding on in Gaza and the West Bank, and there are still large refugee Palestinian communities in Lebanon, in Jordan, in the various Gulf states. So ultimately, there's a lot of Palestinians more than, I think Palestinians outnumber the Jewish the Christian and Muslim sectors of Palestine outnumber the Jewish residents of Palestine by probably about three times as much. So most of the Jewish Palestinians support the Israeli Zionist police state, the fascist police state. So it's really come down to a war of the Zionists against the Christian and Muslim Palestinians, and of course the atheists, people who are not religious, communists, and so forth, as well, who make up still a good part of the Palestinian movement. So, yeah, I mean, I see it as a different situation. I could be totally, surprised, but we'll see. I don't think the Zionist state is going to fall until the American empire falls. And we can see that coming, but, how long it will take, in historic terms, a blink of an eye. We can be sure of that, because things go so much more quickly in today's world than they did in the past. However, from the point of view day to day, you and I living, it's going to seem like a long time, probably. Years and years and years. We'll see. Or it could happen tomorrow. When things erupt, they can change real quickly. Okay. Next on the list is the climate crisis and the intensification of the class war. Once again, Rainer Shea.
Right. See, the U.S. military, at least the smartest facets within the U.S. military, have been with much concern, have been anticipating a climatic catastrophe that they know will severely weaken the U.S. military infrastructure, both abroad and at home. A lot of U.S. military bases are going to be submerged by sea level rise in the coming decades, and a lot of U.S. military occupations are going to be forced to shrink around the world because of the increasing scarcity of water that U.S. forces are going to be confronted with. And according to a 2019 Pentagon document, this is going to extend to the forces that U.S. military is going to be building up within U.S. borders, largely to try to preemptively counter the rebellion. These are the kinds of this is the kind of obstacle that that those planes, that those training troops that you've been talking about within U.S. urban areas are going to have to face in the coming decades as reality catches up with the U.S. empire, as the gravity of the climatic crisis hits the U.S. empire internally. And one major concern that the Department of Defense has is that something like 99% of the DoD's infrastructure, 99% of the U.S. military's internal systems rely on the electrical grid. And the thing about that is the electrical grid in the U.S. is very shaky. It's very poorly maintained due to being constructed by a paradigm of neoliberal privatization. And as a consequence, it's going to no doubt deteriorate, buckle under the pressure in the coming decades of increasing natural disasters. To get a sense of just how inadequate our electrical grid is, in these last couple years, PG&E, which provides the electricity to my area, has had to start cutting off the power in order to avoid lawsuits, because it knows that its grid is so poorly maintained that it regularly creates fires. So it's it's having to deprive millions of electricity just to avoid some financial losses from its own incompetence and its own contributions to our snowballing crisis of wildfires in California. So under this situation, says the DOD, or says the Pentagon about the DOD, there's going to be a huge collapse of the electrical grid that will weaken the military's capabilities, because as the Pentagon document, I quote my article, says, not even the backup generators will reliably be able to maintain the military's functionings. It's going to run into a huge obstacle there. And I think it's inevitable that a lot of the military infrastructure in this country will cease to function. The military is going to have to shrink nationwide. And in this environment of weakening of the US empire's internal repressive forces that it'll depend on so much to crush this hypothetical internal rebellion, the empire is going to rely increasingly on the information war. That's why there's such an effort, I think, from the CIA to convince Americans about lies like the so-called Uyghur genocide, to bombard us with conjured up visions of Kim Jong-un abusing his people. They don't want us to look at these socialist countries and see that they're a viable alternative to the neoliberal capitalist hell that we live under. They don't want us to be paying attention to communism. They want us to keep retreating into this fantasy of communist tyranny that they've constructed. So I see this information warfare. I see this anti-communist propaganda campaign that's intensifying so much as a way to preemptively pacify the population in anticipation of this scenario where the electrical grid has largely gone down and the military has had to scale back externally and internally, and there is going to be such a potential for revolutionary mass movement, such a potential for the formation of a people's army in this country, that the military, the capitalist state in general, is going to be in dire straits at that point. So increasingly, they have to lean onto the information war. They have to lean onto anti-communist propaganda.
Yeah, that's how empires die. This is how empires die. We're witnesses to history here. The outcome is, well, you know, I think you're correct. They're going to lean into the info war because that is the cheapest way. That is something that's pretty easy to do. However, we look at the statistics and we find that Americans just don't believe the billionaire-owned news media anymore. Americans just don't believe what their government tells them. They have very low confidence in Congress and in the White House and the president. Americans have very low confidence in practically all of the institutions. There are a couple of exceptions. The military is one exception. Americans still have a lot of confidence in the institution of the military. Although I look at people in the military, the rank and file working class rank and file of the military, and they seem to feel exactly like their brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and mothers and fathers in the working class communities, which is they don't have confidence in their own leadership. They don't have confidence in their own government. They don't have confidence in their own officer class. So, yeah, I think that what we're going to see is more of the same. We've seen it in the last year. This eruption of Americans out in the streets, rebelling in some cases, protesting in others against the American police state. Confidence in the police, that's another institution. The American police is at an all-time low. So a lot of the apparatus of the American empire and the American fascist state is no longer working the way they hope it will, the way that they designed it to. So, we'll see how this shakes out. Next on the list, horrifying rise of total mass media blackouts on inconvenient news stories. This is a really interesting article that I picked out by Caitlin Johnston. We've featured her work on other shows in the past, other episodes in the past of this show, I mean. I'm just going to read you some highlights from this article. I think it's really telling about the lengths. And this feeds right into what you were just talking about, the American empire leaning on the info war. Anyway, Caitlin Johnston says, 2 different media watchdog outlets, Media Lens and Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, FAIR, have published articles on the complete blackout in mainstream news institutions, on the revelation by Icelandic newspaper Studin that a U.S. superseding indictment in the case against Julian Assange was based on false testimony from a diagnosed sociopath and convicted child molester named Sigurdur Thordarson. Quote, a search online for either Assange or Thordarson will elicit 0 relevant articles from establishment sources, either US or elsewhere in the Anglosphere, even in tech-focused platforms like The Verge, Wired, Gizmodo, says Alan McLeod. And McLeod works, I think he's with Media Lens. This weird, creepy blackout has parallels with another total blackout on a different major news story, which also involved WikiLeaks. In late 2019, the leak outlet Assange founded was publishing multiple documents from whistleblowers in the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW. revealing that the organization's leadership actively tampered in the investigation into an alleged chlorine gas attack in Douma, Syria in 2018. To support the US government narrative on the allegation, yet the mass media won't touch it. For instance, a Newsweek reporter resigned from his position during the scandalous blackout and published the emails of his editors forbidding him from covering the story on the grounds that no other major outlet had reported on it. We also caught a strong whiff of this new trend in the near total blackout on the Hunter Biden October surprise last year, which only went mainstream because it stood to benefit one of America's two mainstream political factions. After the New York Post first broke the story, we saw mainstream media figures publicly explaining to each other why it was fine not to cover it, with reasoning that it was all over the map, from its a waste of time, reasoning that was all over the map, from it's a waste of time to it's just too darn complicated, to it's not our job to research these things to the Washington Post's notorious, we must treat the Hunter Biden leaks as if they were a foreign intelligence operation, even if they probably aren't. Hillary Clinton's emails exposed by WikiLeaks that were full of her crimes in 2016 were also blacked out by the billionaire-owned mass media. And then there has been the ongoing Russiagate hoax, which has been constantly supported. This hoax has been constantly supported by the billionaire owned news media, the liberal news media, as some call it. Even though the hoax has been thoroughly debunked, yet the entire Western mass media refuses to report on how this hoax was perpetrated by the Clinton campaign, the Democrat Party, the CIA, and the FBI, along with the billionaire-owned news media. These are just some examples that Caitlin Johnstone has picked out for us, but we can pick out many, many more. Practically anything going on in China, for instance, there's a total blackout, except when it's propaganda and lies against China. Practically anything having to do with Russia, total blackout. Practically anything having to do with Iran, total blackout. Anything to do with Syria, total blackout. Just as when the Clinton regime back in the 90s set out to destroy Yugoslavia, there was a total blackout of any real news on what was going on there, except for lies and propaganda. The list goes on and on. So yeah, this fits. This is a good segue from your last point about the U.S. Relying on the info war as all of many of its other means of repression and reprisal and control, mind control, and so forth, fail them. So, Rainer, thoughts?
I'm trying to think of other examples, like almost a year ago when I think I remember it was revealed that the Organization of American States had, without a doubt, fabricated the supposed evidence for there having been election fraud in Bolivia 2019.
And that was never reported by any American billionaire-owned news media.
Yeah. If you go back further, I think it was. If you go back further, then you can see that the way that, say, the Soleimani assassination, the events surrounding it were covered, was definitely in a biased way that most definitely worked to assist the narratives put forth by Trump administration officials and by President Trump to justify their assassination of Soleimani, because they claimed that Soleimani had been imminently planning multiple attacks against U.S. embassies, against U.S. facilities, yet nobody reported on how Soleimani had at one point worked with the United States, in the sense that he was assisting the United States in fighting Al Qaeda and ISIS. Nobody mentioned that Soleimani had used to be Washington's ally in that sense. Nobody mentioned how he had worked to defeat terrorism, actually a lot more than Washington ever has, because Washington is what has fostered Al Qaeda and ISIS in Syria to advance its regime change goals. These are the kinds of details that always get omitted from media discussions about these kinds of topics, and we really shouldn't be surprised, because the only outlets that have an incentive to cover these kinds of details are the outlets that get targeted by the social media censorship campaign. Outlets such as Mint Press News, or The Gray Zone, or Venezuela Analysis, or Telesur, or Russia Today. All of these alternative outlets who are working to, they have done pretty good job at exposing these truths, though their motives vary.
Yes, well put. I agree. Yeah, the list goes on and on. We could sit down and really probably just brainstorm and come up with hundreds of examples of the same horrifying, as Caitlin Johnston puts it, a horrifying rise of the total mass media blackouts on inconvenient news stories, and there's certainly lots of inconvenient news stories. There's an organization that puts out every year the 10 most blacklisted important stories, the 10 most important stories that were blacklisted and blacked out by the mass media. So there you have just like a list of 10 from each year, going back several years, because this has been what they've been doing at least for the last 30 years. I've seen this, and you know, that it's no surprise that that's the time in which the mass media has been totally monopolized. It's come down to 95% of what Americans hear, see, read, coming from 6 major media monopolies, giant media corporations. It used to be 50 when I first became a journalist. It was 50. There were 50 major media corporations, and even back then we thought, oh my God, this is so monopolized. You know, now imagine 6 monopolizing all that, and the billionaires who own that and control it. That's where we get most of our news. No wonder Americans are so ignorant when it comes to, and this is not a slight against Americans, it's a slight against the media, because this is a failure by the media to tell the truth. But Americans are incredibly ignorant. People around the world laugh at how ignorant Americans are. So anyway, Next on our list, China's economic weakening of Washington brings revolution closer.
Americans these days have a lot of opinions on China. It seems like pretty much everyone from every end of the U.S. political continuum, except for the Marxist-Leninists like us, have their own personal reasons for opposing China, whether it's the Christian right-wing conspiracy theorists who think that China has been forcing women to get abortions with the one-child policy, or whether it's the confused leftists who think that China is just another capitalist empire, or whether it's the liberals who think that China is totalitarian when the US is way more authoritarian than China has ever been. Americans have so much to say about China of so little substance, and really their opinions don't matter. The people whose opinions on China matter more are the people in Africa who have been experiencing great uplifts in their living standards because of the development projects that China has been carrying out. The Africans, I think by the hundreds of millions, according to this entrepreneur rapper Akon, have been experiencing a new rise in electricity in their communities because of China's infrastructural investments. And it was Mao, not the United States, who was willing to build the railroads that Africa needed. So this Africa-China partnership has been going on for decades, and it's increasingly correcting the global inequities that Western colonialism has created in Africa and elsewhere. So when it comes to China's contributions to a global revolution, China may not try to export revolutions abroad. That's not its goal. It's probably not going to help us win a war against the capitalist state in the US in terms of, say, providing arms aid. Cuba is more likely to do that for us. But in economic terms, China is already fighting the battle that we need to be fought, the battle for the weakening of imperialist economic hegemony.
Right. Well put, and good analysis there. People have heard my opinions on this many, many times, so I'm not going to repeat ad nauseum. In the interest of time, we'll just move on. Imperial decline, settler state colonial delusions, and nuclear tensions.
Yes, there's a delusion that is inherent to the colonial mindset, which is that colonialism has the ability to bypass the basic rules of sociology. The believers in settler colonialism think that they're exempt from the anthropological laws of pushback against occupations and tyranny simply because Euro-American colonialism and neocolonialism have been able to garner more power and wealth than any past imperialist project. Just because the Euro-American imperialist project is unprecedentedly powerful doesn't mean that it's exempt from falling like Rome fell. So there's this hubris that's consistent to the colonial occupiers, whether it's in the United States or in Colombia or in Israel, where the Zionist occupiers have been thinking that they can pacify the Palestinian population by bombing prominent Palestinian buildings and claiming that those buildings included Hamas military assets, as if this was somehow going to magically make the Palestinian people give up on the idea of armed struggle. The occupiers clearly have, they clearly aren't willing to objectively look at the conditions that the communities they're targeting are facing. They think that brute force and the military doctrines that they've invented have the ability to simply take care of the inequities that they think that brute force can solve the contradictions that colonial inequities produce. They think that these populations can be pacified not by correcting those inequities, but by just throwing more bombs at the problem. This is not the case. That's not how human nature works. That's not how societies work. So the colonists, the imperialists, unable to understand why they're unable to pacify these populations, why China is rising as a global power, why capital is in decline. All that they can do is react haphazardly. And that's where the real danger emerges, because the Zionists and the US imperialists have been pushing forth with parallel drives towards nuclear escalation. The US imperialists have been building up against Russia and China and creating a nuclear tension paradigm that's even worse than the one from the Cold War. Will the Zionists have been reacting to Biden's attempts to restore the Iran nuclear deal by pushing forth with more escalations against Iran and bringing up the potential for a war with Iran. It's a scary possibility that Israel will at one point use the many nukes that it's been storing up.
Yeah, estimates between 200 and 600 nukes under this illegal rogue state, the Zionist fascist state. And that's not even to mention the probably even greater risk of US blunder of some sort leading to a nuclear exchange because of the fact that especially under the Biden regime, the military harassment of China, Russia and Iran has stepped up. While China is gravely fearful of ticking off a nuclear exchange, Russia the same, Iran I'm sure the same. Iran doesn't even have nuclear weapons to defend itself. While all three are fearful of this, all three are sovereign independent nations that refuse to kowtow to the American empire. So, rock in a hard place. What gives? Yeah, it's a frightening thing. I've been concerned with it, and I've mentioned it quite often on this show. This rising nuclear tension, another of those stories that never ever gets covered in the imperial media, in the billionaire owned mass media in America, or in the billionaire owned media throughout the Anglosphere and throughout the EU and in Japan, as an example of other minor imperial powers that are that fall in line with the American hegemony. Never gets a story that never gets covered by any of those mass medias is the story of the atomic scientists, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, who have a clock. How close to doomsday are we? It's called the doomsday clock. And about 2 years ago, because of the tensions against China and Russia, the doomsday clock was put forward to 100 seconds to midnight. That's the closest to doomsday we have ever been. We are closer now than, according to that clock, than we were in the so-called Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. It's a very frightening situation, and yet Americans and Europeans and Japanese and others in the Anglosphere never hear this story. It's a story every American should hear because it's crucial, I think, to running a country if, in fact, the American people are the sovereign power of this country, which is what the American bourgeoisie claims. Then at least we need the knowledge to make our decisions on how to vote and so forth. No one gets that information. No wonder people vote for the same Democrat and Republican criminals who are causing this tension. Anyway, next on the list, lies and deliberate mischaracterization typifies liberal historians' portrayal of the American Imperial War on the people of Vietnam. Now, occasionally I watch this young woman. Her name is Luna Oy. I don't know if you've seen Luna Oy. She's a communist who lives in Vietnam, North Vietnam. She lives in the northern part of Vietnam. And she does, I think, a really excellent job of education, coming from one of the greatest communist countries in the world today. Socialist country, we should accurately call it. And the Vietnamese say that they have a socialist state, which is true because they do have a socialist state, just as China does, despite all those idiots you were talking about earlier on the synthetic left, the American Western left, who claim that China is an empire. No, China is a socialist workers' state. Vietnam is too. Anyway, Luna Oy, of course, because her family was affected, she had family members who died fighting the Americans and the French and the Japanese and the other imperialist powers that invaded Vietnam during this past century. She has done a lot of good work on Vietnam, and recently, last couple of weeks, I think, this joker, a liberal historian from America, he calls himself the armchair historian. Anyway, he put out a YouTube video entitled the Vietnam War from a North Vietnamese perspective. And Luna Oy took umbrance with a lot of the mischaracterizations in this video, which claimed to be from the North Vietnamese perspective of the war, and yet it really was more liberal mischaracterizations, lies, propaganda, uh, justifying the war and making excuses for the war and so forth. So Luna put out her own video, point by point, telling where this guy lied. His description of the Dien Bien Phu battle, which was a crucial battle in 1954 between the communist military forces of Ho Chi Minh and the French colonialists who were trying, after the Japanese had been driven out in 1945, they were trying to retake Vietnam. They took the southern part of Vietnam and set up a puppet fascist regime there. And they were trying to defeat the northern section of Vietnam, where the Communist Party of Vietnam was in power, and Ho Chi Minh had been elected president there. So the way he characterized that battle, in which the communist forces decisively defeated the French and drove the French once and for all out of Vietnam. That was 1954. Then the Americans moved in immediately to take the place of the French colonialists. They moved into the South, took over the dictatorship of the South, the fascist dictatorship that had been set up by the French originally. And under the UN mandate that brought about a peace after the withdrawal of French forces, there was supposed to be an election in 1956, an election of all Vietnamese people, to allow the Vietnamese people to decide who they wanted as their leader, who they wanted as their president. And anybody at that time who knew anything about Vietnam, North and South, will tell you with no uncertainty that Ho Chi Minh would have been elected in that election, and Ho Chi Minh would have become the president, and the Communist Party of Vietnam would have been elected to the parliament, and Vietnam would have been a communist country. However, the Americans, using their power in the South, sabotaged the whole election, never allowed it to happen. So then, anyway, this armchair historian mischaracterized that. Luna set him straight. Then she goes on to how he characterized the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964. I was just about old enough to really realize what was going on then. I was 10 years old then, and I remember all the news and everything about the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Well, this armchair historian reports on how the Gulf of Tonkin incident led to the introduction of U.S. military forces into the South and the huge escalation of the war, never mentioning that the Gulf of Tonkin incident was a total fucking fabrication. So Luna had to correct him again. This is the kind of, so this is this joker pretending to be giving the North Vietnamese viewpoint on the war was just a joke. So anyway, I'm going to include that link by Luna Oy in the description below tonight's video. And I'm going to include a couple of other links that Luna Oy mentions, like a great book by Giap, who was the North Vietnamese great general who led to the great victories against the French and the Americans throughout the war. And he wrote a memoir, I think was in the People's Liberation, the People's War, something like that. And anyway, Luna herself and her YouTube, which I will include the link to, has some other links under her video that are quite useful in understanding more about what really went on in Vietnam. And the thing, the biggest lesson we should learn is not just that Americans always lie to drag Americans into war, that the American imperialists always lie, that Wall Street always lies, that the billionaires always lie, the ruling class always lies. They make up fabrications to get us into the war. They did the same thing with the WMDs in Iraq, which was the same kind of fabrication, lie. They do the same things and fabrications against, they did the same thing in Libya against Muammar Gaddafi, claiming that he was ready to mass murder 5.5 million people, which would be extraordinary because Libya at that time only had 6 million people in it. So, you know, it was a fabrication, a lie every fucking time. Their proxy war against the people of Syria, fabrication after fabrication. Not only should we learn that, but we should just learn that the American government can never be trusted in anything they say. I think that should be a theme. That is kind of like a theme that's popped out to me, at least in our discussion tonight, that you can never trust what the American government or the capitalist ruling class in America says about anything. There's always an ulterior motive. There's always a lie involved. And more people are catching on. That's why the trust in the American government is so low. That's why the trust in the mass media is so low. Thoughts, Rainer?
Oh, this liberal account of the Vietnam War, it makes me think, what's even the point of lying about things the communists there supposedly did when the communists have won? It doesn't change the outcome of the war. It feels like cope. It feels like an attempt to make the imperial sphere feel better. Something like half a century after the imperialists lost to the forces of socialism in Vietnam, as well as in Laos. And you mentioned how the imperialists have, in more recent years, succeeded at but the same dynamics of imperial decline, of class struggle, are at play in our world today. The victory of the Bolivian socialists in this last year shows this, and at some point the U.S. empire is going to fall. After then, places like Libya are going to be able to rebuild themselves in the same kinds of ways that the Vietnamese rebuilt themselves after the imperialists attempted to bring their nation down to its knees.
Yeah, definitely. Rebuilding is going to be a big part of the early phase after the American Empire is collapses. Yeah, well, I'll leave it at that. That's it for us tonight. I think we had a pretty good show. Next week, we hope to have a special guest that I think people will enjoy. Keep in touch with us more on that later. Keep an eye out. And meantime, I want to thank everyone in the viewing and listening audience for tuning in. I want to thank you, Rainer, for your always tremendous contribution to the show. And urge everyone to stick with us and come back again next week where we'll have more. So long, Rainer. So long, everybody else. I bid you sweet adieu.